Ever since I started my journey into music production in the late 90s, I've gradually been improving my home studio setup. I slowly accumulated better audio devices, synths, speakers, and more recently, dedicated studio spaces with sound treatment and room to set up my equipment properly. But then a few years ago, all of that changed when my wife and I bought our first house together. Getting onto the property ladder in London is notoriously difficult, and in order for us to get a foot on it, we had to buy something which was, and still is, very much a project. When we first moved in, the house was pretty neglected, but we've slowly been working on it and improving it bit by bit. And now it's actually quite nice, although there is still plenty more to do. But one thing I had to sacrifice was a studio. We just didn't have the space inside to dedicate a whole room to my music. But there was a small brick shed in the garden, and over the past 2 years I've been renovating that and preparing it to be my new studio. But at this stage it's still some way off being ready. So for now I've been relegated to this, the smallest box room in the house. It has just enough space to squeeze in a work table, a desk, which I also use for my other job, and a few additional bits and pieces. But when I need to do music work, I first have to set everything up temporarily, and then I have to pack it away again afterwards. And most of my non-essential music equipment is still packed away in storage. I don't have any acoustic treatment other than this duvet, which does double duty as a sound absorber and also a curtain to hide a wall of storage, which also has to live in here. The room doesn't even have a door, since we had to take that off in order to get everything to fit inside. So any noise in the rest of the house will inevitably end up on recordings I make in here. So what am I getting to with all of this? Well, I think as producers, we are constantly being bombarded with information telling us that we have to have the absolute best of everything. We have to have the best equipment, the best room setup, the best plugins. And we start to feel like unless we have all of this stuff, we can't even really call ourselves legitimate producers. Like we're somehow faking it if we create music in our bedrooms or sat at our kitchen table. But the reality is, all of that is just nonsense. If you have a passion for making music and some good ideas, all of the rest is just sugarcoating. Yeah, having some good equipment and some good plugins might make your life easier, but it's not going to make you a more legitimate producer. That comes from your ideas and your creativity. So if you've got some good ideas, don't wait until you have the perfect setup to get started. Just start making music and see what comes of it. I guarantee you'll get much better results than you might expect. Would you be able to create the most high-fidelity production based in a bedroom? Probably not, but who cares? The fact of the matter is, there are many highly successful pieces of music that have absolutely atrocious mixing issues, but it doesn't stop them from being good tunes. And also, many artists have had their big breaks from working in a bedroom. Skrillex, The Prodigy, Daniel Bedingfield, Calvin Harris. I could go on all day. So you don't need a big professional space to make good music. All you need is some good ideas and some passion. So yes, I have in fact released quite a few tracks from this tiny little temporary space. The most recent of which is this, which is I'm VIP. Which I released a couple of weeks ago. And it's doing pretty well so far. Getting pretty good response. Seems to be quite a popular track. And yeah, I made it right here in this little space, while also working on my second job at the same time. So let's talk a little bit about some of the issues with working in a place like this. Obviously, the first one is these speakers you can see here, which are really just really rubbish. They are just bog standard Chinese kind of desktop type speakers. The tweeters aren't even real, they're actually fake. So the only drivers are these full range drivers at the bottom there. And to get anything like close to full range from them, I actually have to run them through this little graphic equalizer, which is also crap. But it does allow me to push the bass up a little bit and push the treble up a bit and get a more linear frequency response from these tiny little speakers. But the trick with this is that even when I'm not working on music and I'm doing other stuff, I generally always have music playing. Usually stuff that I like on Spotify or, from my own collection. And that means that I know these speakers very, very well because I listen to them for many hours every day. And that means that when I'm making my own music on them, I have all of that other listening experience that I can use as a reference. And that means that I can actually get a fairly good mix even on these terrible speakers. Certainly when I'm doing the first laying out of all the tracks and kind of getting the elements together, I can actually mix fine just on these little speakers. So the other issue with working in a space like this is that there isn't really space to set up controllers or keyboards. So I actually created this entire track using this little 25-note keyboard. And it was enough just to key in some notes. And it does have one controller on it, which I can set to various parameters if I'm trying to automate things. But everything else I did on screen. This was just really to play in the initial notes for each track. And you can manage with something like this. It's not ideal. You're not going to play any virtuoso solos on it, but it's not bad. So this is my Rode NT1A, which I used for recording all the vocals. And I also use this when I'm doing voiceovers for videos as well. It's just attached to this arm on my desk, and I can just pull it out when I need it, and just basically record my vocals. So what I normally do is I use one of my audio devices. I just connect it up to the laptop temporarily so that I can make the recording, and then I just put it away again afterwards. For general mixing purposes, I actually just use the headphone socket on the laptop, because quite honestly, the worst link in the chain is these speakers rather than the sound card in this instance. So mixing using the normal laptop sound card actually didn't give me any issues at all. So for most of the tracks in this project, I actually just used the stock Ableton Live plugins. I'm actually a big advocate for using stock plugins wherever possible, because if you are anything like me, sometimes I'll start working on a project and then I might put it away for quite a long time, sometimes years, and then when I want to come back and work on that project again, if I've been using a lot of third-party plugins, often things don't work properly, or perhaps I don't have that plugin anymore and I've got to then replace it with something else, and it just becomes a faff. Whereas if you use the stock plugins, you can open a project up sometimes after 10 or more years, and everything will just play exactly as it was when you put it away. So wherever possible, I try and use stock plugins. There are a few places where I need a specific type of sound and I might use a third-party plugin, but really I've learned to use all of the stock plugins in Ableton to as best as I can. And quite often I find it's very rare that I need to actually reach for third-party plugins. I can get the sound that I need most of the time just using the stock stuff. So when I'm trying to get some precision in my mix, these little crappy speakers just really aren't going to cut it. So that's where I switched to mixing on headphones. And I have two main sets of headphones that I tend to use. These are my HD 650s. These are Sennheiser headphones. I've had these for well over a decade now, and they are absolutely excellent headphones. They are very, very clear, particularly in the mid and high ranges, so they're very good for picking out issues in mixes. They are quite a flat frequency response, and most of the time we're used to listening to music that has a little bit of a hump in the low end. So these can sound a little bit light on the bass end. So what I do is I alternate between these headphones and these, which are HD 25s, also Sennheiser. These are actually DJ headphones, but they have a very strong low end. They are quite clear, but they're not quite as crystal clear as these ones. So for high parts of the mix and real detailed mixing, these are much better for that. But for getting the low end sounding good, these headphones really are the best that I can find for those. They've got a nice powerful bass end, but it's not boomy, it's nice and clear, so you can really fine tune the bass and the kick drum and all the low parts of the mix using these headphones. So then once I've done the first pass mix on the headphones, then the next thing I do is I bounce the track down and then I put it onto my phone, and then I take it downstairs to my hi-fi system and I listen to it on there. And I also take it out to my car and I listen to it while I'm driving. And those different systems will generally tend to pick out some other issues with the mix. So for example, in the car, the sound system tends to accentuate any problems in the sort of high-mid area of the mix. So hi-hats, for example, or vocals, sometimes they can sound really sharp and honky and that is an indication that I need to tame some of the frequencies up at the top end there. Likewise, the hi-fi, I've got it set up normally for watching movies, so it's got a lot of low-end rumble, which is really good for things like explosions and action sequences and whatnot. But if there are any problems with the low end of the mix in a track, it will sound incredibly boomy on that hi-fi, and that will be an indication that I then need to tame the low end down a little bit as well. So I cycle between all of those, listening on the different headphones, listening on the other systems, and then coming back and listening on these speakers. And after a few rounds of that, I get it to the point where it sounds pretty good on pretty much all of the systems that I've tried it on. And that's the point at which I do a final mix, I do a final master, and then that's when I bounce it down and get it ready to distribute. So the point that I'm really trying to get to with this video is you don't need a proper space to make music in, and you also don't need a lot of equipment to make music with. The only two things you really need are your laptop and a pair of headphones. Everything else is just nice to haves and makes your life a bit easier, but you can create studio quality productions sat on your bed, sat at your kitchen table, while you're on a train. We live in this golden age where we have all of this technology at our fingertips. So just get out there and use it. Don't worry about whether your room is treated. Don't worry about what quality your speakers are. Just get out there and produce as much music as you can. And the more you do, the better it will get in whatever environment you're working in. So that's it for this one. I hope you found it useful and inspiring. And if you've made it this far, please just hit the like button or leave a comment. It all just helps with the algorithm. And there'll be plenty more coming down the pipeline soon. As I mentioned earlier in the video, I am working on my new studio out in the garden, and hopefully it might be finished within the next sort of 3 or 4 months or so. And then I can really get stuck into some bigger productions that I've got waiting to go. I just need more space for filming than I've got in here. So that's coming up. So please just subscribe in the meantime, and we will have a whole bunch of very interesting stuff coming down the pipeline in the next year or so. All the best. Happy producing.